If a country's strongest ally and its biggest customer pull apart, how does it keep its balance? Australian officials have long walked a tightrope between a security partner in Washington and a trading partner in Beijing. In this piece from 4 June 2026, that balancing act looks increasingly shaky. Following a tense regional summit, the dilemma moves from the sheer cost of new submarines to the harder price of losing the ability to choose. Australia finds that sitting on the fence is no longer an option when the pressure to pick a side arrives from both directions at once. Written by Marina Ye Zhang in The Diplomat, narrated for Arva. At the 2026 Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth delivered a message Australia cannot afford to ignore. He sounded what he called a rightful alarm over China's rapid military buildup, warned against any single power dominating the Indo-Pacific, and urged regional allies and partners to lift their defense spending. At the same time, Hegseth struck a more measured tone toward Beijing, despite China sending only a lower-level delegation to the Shangri-La Dialogue for the second year in a row. He spoke of strategic stability, military-to-military contact, and the need to avoid miscalculation. He made no direct mention of Taiwan, and when asked about future arms sales, declined to give a firm commitment. For Australia, the speech could mark a turning point. Canberra is being asked to spend more and align more closely with U.S. strategy, just as Washington's commitments look less predictable, and Beijing becomes less patient with Australia's strategic ambiguity. In Hegseth's framing, Australia sits among Washington's model allies, alongside Japan, South Korea, and others. Facing a more contested strategic environment, Australia needs greater military capability, more resilient supply chains, and a larger defense industrial workforce. But beyond the question of whether Australia should spend more is the question of whether Canberra has a clear strategy for what that spending is meant to achieve. Australia's 2026-27 defense budget is about $62.6 billion, or 2% of GDP, well below the 3.5% level being urged by Washington. Meeting that target would have serious economic consequences.
Every additional dollar committed to submarines, missiles, bases, and sustainment must be weighed against productivity, infrastructure, universities, and industrial policy. AUKUS illustrates the dilemma facing Canberra. The latest announcements streamline Australia's pathway to acquiring 3 in-service Virginia-class submarines from the United States and expand cooperation on undersea technologies. This is where Australia's strategic autonomy is narrowing. More of its security choices are being locked into allied systems, platforms, and assumptions. AUKUS ties Australia's future submarine capability to US and UK industrial capacity, training systems, and nuclear stewardship. Meanwhile, deeper force posture cooperation, intelligence sharing, and defense industrial integration reinforce operational dependence. On the other hand, Australia's choice is made harder by a more assertive and less patient China. From Beijing's perspective, Canberra's security and economic logics are pulling in different directions. The former suggests deeper alignment with Washington, while the latter implies continuing economic interdependence with China. This dual structure, which has long been described as hedging, is becoming harder to sustain. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong's recent visit to China and the 8th Australia-China Foreign and Strategic Dialogue were part of the effort to stabilize ties with Beijing. Yet China is increasingly likely to judge Australia by what it does, not by what it says. Australia's deeper commitment to AUKUS, closer defense ties with Japan, and more active role in maritime security all point, from China's perspective, to tighter integration with the US-led security system. Canberra may see this as prudent deterrence.
Beijing increasingly sees Australia as part of the US regional security architecture. For years, China treated Australia as a Western country with which pragmatic cooperation remained possible because of deep economic complementarity. The relationship deteriorated during COVID-19, but has since stabilized. Yet Beijing now appears to see Australia less as a potential partner within the Western camp, as a U.S. ally with limited strategic autonomy. For Australia, the old assumption that economic ties can cushion strategic divergence is becoming less reliable.
Trade, ministerial dialogue, and business links may recover, but strategic mistrust remains and is likely to deepen. The real risk is that Canberra's China policy becomes shaped more by external pressure than by its own strategic choices. The answer is not to retreat from the U.S. alliance, nor is it to pretend that China's rise poses no strategic challenge. Australia's alliance with the United States remains central to its security, but alliance management should not become a substitute for independent strategic judgment. For Australia, the central question is how to preserve strategic agency as both powers become more demanding. The lesson from the Shangri-La dialogue is that ambiguity is becoming harder to sustain. Canberra needs a clearer account of what it wants the U.S. alliance to deliver, what risks it is prepared to bear, and how it will keep diplomatic and economic channels with China open, even as deterrence hardens. Middle powers still have room to maneuver, but only if they define their interests before others define them on their behalf.